Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and imagine, for a moment, that the greatest fear of your life, the fear of death, is nothing more than a misunderstanding. Most of us spend our lives haunted by shadows of the inevitable. We whisper to ourselves about the end, about the day the lights go out, about the silence that follows. But what if this fear is an illusion? What if death is not the end at all, but a shift in perspective, a trick of the mind, a veil drawn across reality that can, with clarity, be lifted? Tonight, I will take you by the hand and guide you through the philosophy of Baruch Spinoza, the 17th century thinker who dared to rewrite the very meaning of God, life, and death. Spinoza lived in a time of persecution, excommunication, and danger. Yet he found in philosophy a peace so deep that even death could not disturb it. He taught that we are not fragile sparks flickering in the void. We are part of an infinite substance, eternal, unbreakable, beyond the grasp of mortality. For Spinoza, to fear death is to misunderstand life itself. So let us drift together, not into panic, but into serenity. Let us explore the ideas of a philosopher who saw eternity in a grain of sand and freedom in the acceptance of necessity. This is not just philosophy, it is a lullaby for the soul. Now, rest easy and listen closely. For in the quiet wisdom of Spinoza, you may just discover that death has been an illusion all along. Imagine yourself drifting back in time to the 17th century, when Europe was alive with both discovery and fear. The streets of Amsterdam smelled of salt and spice, for ships from every corner of the known world anchored in its harbors. The city was a place of paradox, on the one hand, a haven of commerce, tolerance, and intellectual exchange, and on the other, a place haunted by suspicion, persecution, and religious tension. Here, in this city, where Jewish merchants rubbed shoulders with Calvinist burghers, and where philosophers whispered their dangerous thoughts in quiet taverns, a boy named Baruch Spinoza was born. He came into this world in 1632, in a small, tight-knit Jewish community, made up largely of refugees from Spain and Portugal. These were families who had fled the horrors of the Inquisition, who had pretended to be Christians for survival, but still clung, secretly and stubbornly, to their ancestral faith. In Amsterdam, they found a fragile safety, a place where they could openly rebuild their identity and practice their religion without the constant threat of imprisonment or burning stakes. But that safety was never absolute, for tolerance was conditional, and suspicion lingered like a fog at the edges of their lives. Baruch grew up in this world of contradictions, safe, but never completely free. His father, Michael, was a respected merchant, trading in dried fruit, nuts, and spices, working tirelessly to support his family and maintain his standing in the community. Young Baruch was expected to follow in these footsteps, to learn Hebrew, to master the scriptures, to contribute to the synagogue, and eventually to take his place as a respectable man of trade. But even from his earliest years, there was a spark in him that resisted. He was quiet, observant, and his mind wandered toward questions that others feared to ask. At the age when most children memorized verses of Torah to recite by heart, Spinoza wanted to know not just what the verses said, but what they meant. Why did the texts sometimes contradict themselves? Why did God demand obedience in some passages and offer mercy in others? Why, if God was truly infinite, would he concern himself with the tiny rituals of human beings? These were not the kinds of questions that earned approval from teachers. They were the kinds of questions that hinted at rebellion. Questions that suggested the boy might not be content to repeat what was written, but might wish to think for himself. Meanwhile, outside the walls of his community, The Netherlands was experiencing its own kind of transformation. The country had fought hard for independence from Spain, and in doing so, it had become a republic with a spirit of experimentation. Its merchants dominated trade routes. Its painters Rembrandt, Vermeer captured light and shadow, like no others. Its scientists charted the skies, dissected the body, and began to imagine a world that could be explained by natural laws rather than divine mystery. The printing press carried ideas faster than ships could sail, and whispers of Galileo's discoveries, Descartes' reasoning, and Hobbes' political theories floated through the air like pollen. Baruch was fascinated by this larger world. Even though his community tried to keep such ideas at bay, he began to read Latin, the language of scholars, so that he could access works beyond the confines of his synagogue. And once he began, there was no going back. He encountered Descartes, who argued that knowledge must be built on reason rather than tradition. He encountered the new science, which suggested that the heavens were not the mysterious domain of angels, but a system governed by laws of motion and matter. Slowly, Spinoza began to imagine that religion, philosophy, and science were not enemies, but different expressions of the same search for truth. Yet, this desire to think freely came with a cost. The Jewish community in Amsterdam, like so many others, feared that if one of their own strayed too far, it would attract the wrath of the surrounding society. They were tolerated by the Dutch only so long as they kept to themselves, only so long as they did not provoke scandal. A boy who asked too many questions, who seemed to lean too heavily toward Christian thinkers or radical philosophers, was dangerous. For Spinoza, the very place that had offered his family refuge began to feel like another kind of cage. By the time he reached his early 20s, Baruch Spinoza was already marked as unusual. He withdrew more and more from the rituals of the synagogue, preferring to spend his days in study. He questioned not just the authority of Scripture, but the very assumptions of organized religion. How could God be separate from the world, if the world itself revealed infinite complexity? How could divine law be understood as a set of rigid commandments when the universe itself seemed to move with such fluid, natural necessity? It was during these years that Spinoza began to shape the ideas that would define him. He came to believe that God was not a distant king, not a ruler seated above the clouds, but identical with nature itself. God was in the motion of the planets, the growth of a tree, the beating of a heart. God was substance, infinite and eternal, of which everything we see and experience is a mode, a fleeting expression. This was an idea both beautiful and terrifying, for it dissolved the neat boundaries between sacred and secular, human and divine. It made the whole world holy, but it also challenged centuries of tradition. The more he pursued these thoughts, the more isolated he became. To many of his fellow Jews, and even to many Christians of the time, such notions were unthinkable, even blasphemous. To say that God was not a person but an infinite substance was to strip away the intimacy of prayer, the authority of Scripture, and the power of priests. Yet to Spinoza, this vision was not a denial of God but an affirmation of the deepest truth. God was not smaller than we imagined, he thought. God was larger. So large, in fact, that nothing could exist outside him. This was the Amsterdam Spinoza grew up in. Bustling, alive, dangerous, and full of contradiction. It was a city where exiles had fled to find peace, but where peace was conditional. A city where tolerance was celebrated, but only to a point. A city where trade flourished and ideas were exchanged, but where any idea too radical could mean the end of a life, or worse, the loss of a community's fragile safety. It was here that Spinoza's radical vision was born, and it was here, too, that the seeds of his eventual exile and solitude were planted. By the time Spinoza reached the age of 24, his questions had become too dangerous for the community to ignore. At first, there were warnings. Elders and rabbis tried to counsel him, urging him to abandon his path and return to the fold. They reminded him of his duties, of his lineage, of the fragile safety his people had carved out in a hostile world. But Spinoza could not return, for the truth he sought was larger than obedience, larger even than his own place within the synagogue. The conflict came to a head in 1656. The leaders of the Portuguese Jewish community in Amsterdam issued one of the harshest punishments available to them: the herem, or excommunication. In solemn words, they declared that Baruch Spinoza was cut off from the people of Israel. They cursed him by day and by night, cursed his lying down and his rising up, cursed his words and his deeds. They declared that no one should speak to him, that no one should read his writings, that no one should come within 4 cubits of his presence. He was, in essence, erased. For a man so young, this might have been crushing. To be rejected by one's own people, to be condemned, not just socially but spiritually, is a wound that can shape a life. But Spinoza bore it with remarkable calm. Perhaps he had expected it. Perhaps he even welcomed it, for it freed him from obligations he no longer believed in. He left behind his birth name, Baruch, the blessed, and adopted the Latin version, Benedictus. He stepped away from the synagogue and into a life of solitude. Yet solitude did not mean silence. Cut off from his community, Spinoza began to live simply, earning his bread by grinding lenses for telescopes and microscopes. It was delicate work, requiring patience, precision, and a steady hand qualities that mirrored his approach to philosophy. He lived modestly, in rented rooms, never wealthy, never seeking fame. But in his solitude, he began to write. His ideas were now free to take their full shape, unconstrained by the fear of rabbinical censure. He argued that Scripture should not be read as divine dictation, but as human literature, beautiful, poetic, but bound by the limitations of history. He argued that miracles were not suspensions of natural law, but misunderstandings of natural law. He argued that the best life was one guided by reason, a life where passions and fears were mastered by understanding. These claims were radical enough, but it was his vision of God that shocked his contemporaries most. To Spinoza, God was not a person at all, but the single infinite substance of reality. God was the laws of nature themselves. God was the order of the cosmos. God was not a judge watching from the heavens, but the very fabric of existence. In this vision, there was no need for priests, no need for rituals, no need for dogma. To know God was not to recite prayers, but to understand the world. This was liberation for some, but heresy for most. Christians saw in it a denial of the personal God of the Bible. Jews saw in it a rejection of their covenant. Even fellow philosophers recoiled at the boldness of the claim. And yet, Spinoza remained serene. He seemed almost indifferent to the condemnation that followed him, as if he had already accepted that truth was worth more than approval. His solitude gave him strength. He did not live in bitterness. He did not attack his former community or mock their beliefs. He simply continued, quietly and steadily, to unfold the implications of his thought. He found companionship with a small circle of friends, other freethinkers who admired his courage and clarity. He declined prestigious positions that would have bound him to universities or governments. He refused to compromise his independence for the sake of recognition. This independence became the hallmark of his philosophy. Just as he had freed himself from the authority of rabbis and priests, he urged others to free themselves from the tyranny of fear and superstition. He taught that freedom was not licensed to do whatever one pleased, but the ability to live according to reason, to act in harmony with the necessary order of the universe. And so, even in exile, even in solitude, Spinoza found a deeper kind of belonging in the eternal substance of nature itself. It is easy to imagine the loneliness he must have felt. No festivals with his community, no warm greetings in the marketplace, no sense of home within the walls of his synagogue. And yet, he replaced these losses with something vast, something eternal. He found in philosophy a kind of companionship that transcended exile. He lived with the quiet certainty that he was not cut off at all, but part of an infinite whole that could never reject him. Spinoza's excommunication was meant to silence him, but it did the opposite. It gave him the space to become one of the boldest thinkers of his age. It set him on a path where solitude was not a curse but a crucible, refining his ideas into something luminous. His exile was the price of his freedom, and his freedom was the soil from which his philosophy grew. Imagine lying in bed at night, staring into the vastness of the dark, wondering whether someone or something is truly watching over you. For centuries, people imagined a God who was above, a king-like figure dwelling in a distant heaven, ruling with commandments and punishments. It was comforting for some, terrifying for others. But in the 17th century, Baruch Spinoza whispered a thought so revolutionary, so breathtaking, that it would scandalize the faithful and inspire the future. What if God was not above or beyond, but here? What if God was not separate from the world, but the world itself? This was Spinoza's bold redefinition, Deus sive, natura, God, or nature. With those three words, he changed the entire vocabulary of philosophy. For him, the divine was not a person, not a mind outside of the cosmos, but the very essence of reality. To say God and to say nature was to speak of the same infinite substance, the single reality from which everything flows and in which everything lives. This redefinition was shocking because it dissolved the boundary between sacred and profane. If God was nature, then the growth of a blade of grass, the orbit of the planets, the beating of your own heart, all were divine acts. The divine was not locked away in temples or cathedrals, not accessible only to priests or prophets. It was spread evenly through every drop of rain, every gust of wind, every sigh of a sleeping child. And yet, Spinoza did not mean what many people today might mean when they say, nature is divine. He was not offering a sentimental or poetic metaphor. He meant it literally. God was not in nature as a presence within a thing, the way wine fills a glass. God is nature. Everything that exists is in God, and nothing can exist outside of God. There is no beyond, no empty space where God is absent. Existence itself is divine. This redefinition was liberating, but it also stripped away cherished illusions. For Spinoza, God does not listen to prayers. God does not intervene to suspend the laws of physics on your behalf. God does not get angry when you sin, or pleased when you obey. For Spinoza, such ideas were anthropomorphic projections, attempts to imagine God in human terms, as if the infinite substance of reality could be reduced to the image of a father or a judge. To believe in such a God was, in his view, to misunderstand the grandeur of existence. Instead, he taught that true reverence for God means understanding the necessary order of nature. To love God is not to flatter him with ritual, but to see clearly how the world works, to appreciate the beauty of its laws, and to accept our place within its vastness. This is what he called the intellectual love of God. It was not the trembling devotion of the faithful, nor the bargaining prayers of the desperate. It was a serene joy that comes from recognizing that we are not alien creatures dropped into a hostile universe. We are expressions of the universe itself. To many of his contemporaries, this was intolerable. They wanted a God who rewarded and punished, who chose favorites, who stood on their side of battles and vindicated their suffering. Spinoza offered instead a God who was impartial, who did not play favorites because he could not, a God whose perfection was not measured by mercy or wrath, but by necessity. Everything that happens follows from the nature of God, just as the properties of a triangle follow from its definition. In this sense, God was not above the world, but the world itself, unfolding according to its eternal order. This vision, serene and uncompromising, offered both comfort and discomfort. Comfort, because it meant that we live in an ordered universe, not a chaotic accident. Discomfort, because it meant that tragedies and joys alike arise from the same necessity. There is no divine intervention to stop plagues, but neither is there divine punishment to cause them. There is no chosen nation, but neither is there ultimate rejection. There is simply the eternal unfolding of reality. In this light, the human fear of death takes on a new meaning. If God is not outside of nature, but is nature itself, then nothing is ever truly lost. Individual forms pass away, but the substance remains. The wave crashes, but the ocean endures. To fear death, for Spinoza, was to cling to the illusion that we exist separately from God. To understand God as nature was to see that we are never separate, never cut off, never truly ending. So Spinoza's redefinition of God was not meant to diminish the sacred, but to expand it until it filled everything. Instead of confining God to temples, he spread God through every particle of being. Instead of binding divinity to a set of words, he bound it to existence itself. It was an audacious, revolutionary, and profoundly peaceful vision, one that would cost him acceptance in his time, but would echo for centuries as a radical reminder: God is not elsewhere. God is here. God is everything. To understand Spinoza's philosophy more deeply, we must linger on his architecture of reality, the way he described the scaffolding of existence itself. In his masterpiece, The Ethics, he lays out this vision with a clarity and rigor that has astonished readers ever since. And yet, though the language is geometric and precise, at its heart, it offers a vision of reality that can be deeply calming, like a great cosmic lullaby. For Spinoza, everything begins with the concept of substance. Substance is that which exists in itself and is conceived through itself. In simpler words, it is the fundamental reality that does not depend on anything else. You can think of substance as the infinite canvas upon which the picture of the universe is painted, or the ocean from which all waves arise. For Spinoza, there can only be one true substance, and that substance is God, or nature. Everything else that we see, mountains, rivers, stars, and ourselves, are expressions of that one infinite substance. Within this framework, he introduced the ideas of attributes and modes. Attributes are the ways in which the substance is expressed. They are the infinite qualities of God. Human beings, limited as we are, know only two of them clearly: thought and extension. Thought is the realm of ideas, the life of the mind, the inner world of consciousness. Extension is the realm of matter, the outer world of bodies, shapes, and motion. For Spinoza, these are not separate realms, but two expressions of the same underlying reality. The mind and the body so often torn apart in philosophy, are in his system parallel, two sides of the same coin. Modes, then, are the particular forms that attributes take in time and space. Just as a wave is a mode of the ocean, or a ray of sunlight is a mode of the sun, every individual thing is a mode of God's attributes. You and I are modes of thought and extension. A stone is a mode of extension. An idea is a mode of thought. Each thing is not an isolated being, but a temporary configuration of the infinite substance. The beauty of this vision is its unity. Instead of a world chopped into pieces, with matter and mind struggling for dominance, with God above and nature below, Spinoza offered a seamless fabric. Everything flows from the same source. Everything participates in the same order. There is no hard boundary between sacred and profane, no ultimate division between spirit and matter. The attributes and modes are simply the infinite substance unfolding itself in countless ways. This also explains his radical rejection of free will, as most people understood it. If everything is a mode of God's infinite substance, then everything follows necessarily from the nature of God. Just as the properties of a circle follow necessarily from the definition of a circle, so too do events follow necessarily from the divine nature. This does not make life meaningless. On the contrary, it gives life its structure. We are not adrift in chaos. We are expressions of order, woven into the eternal architecture of being. Spinoza's system can seem abstract at first, but it carries profound implications for how we live. To recognize ourselves as modes of God's attributes is to recognize that our lives are not alien accidents, but necessary expressions of the universe. It means that our thoughts and our bodies are not enemies, but harmonized reflections of the same underlying substance. It means that to understand the world is, in a sense, to understand God. And it means that our death is not the annihilation of being, but the transformation of one mode into another. Think of a wave that rises on the ocean. For a moment, it has a shape, a height, a rhythm that seems its own, but it was never separate from the ocean. And when it falls, it does not vanish, it returns. So it is with us. As modes of the infinite substance, our individuality is real, but it is not ultimate. We are part of something larger, and in that larger whole, nothing is ever truly lost. This vision can bring a strange serenity. To see yourself not as an isolated creature struggling against fate, but as a necessary expression of eternal substance, is to find peace in necessity. To love life as it is, with its joys and sorrows, is to participate in what Spinoza called the intellectual love of God. It is to rest in the assurance that we are woven into an eternal architecture of reality, where nothing is wasted, nothing is meaningless, and everything belongs. Close your eyes and imagine yourself as a drop of water resting in the vast ocean. For a time, you may feel like you are something separate, a distinct form, rolling gently on the waves. You seem to have your own identity, your own existence. But the truth is that at no moment were you apart from the sea. You were always part of it, always an expression of its depth, its motion, its endlessness. In the same way, Spinoza tells us, we are never separate from the infinite substance of reality. Our sense of isolation is a powerful illusion, born of limited perspective, but an illusion nonetheless. When Spinoza wrote about substance, attributes, and modes, he wanted us to recognize that nothing exists outside of God or nature. Every single thing we see, hear, or touch is not a self-contained entity, but a mode, a fleeting shape that emerges from the infinite whole. And yet, when we experience ourselves We often feel as though we are cut off. We say, I am here, and you are there. I am myself, and the world is outside me. But this, Spinoza insists, is a misunderstanding. It is the illusion of separation. Why do we fall into this illusion so easily? Perhaps it is because our senses are narrow. We see only fragments of the whole picture. Our eyes capture only a small range of light. Our ears only a slice of sound. Our minds only a few thoughts at a time. With such limited instruments, we cannot perceive the infinite expanse directly. We see only our little portion of existence, and we mistake it for the whole. It is as though we live in a single room of a vast mansion, never stepping beyond its walls. And so we come to believe the mansion is nothing more than this one chamber. This illusion is reinforced by language. When we say, I, we draw a circle around ourselves, defining the boundary of our skin, our memories, our private experiences. But Spinoza would remind us that this circle is artificial. The air you breathe is not separate from you. The food that sustains you is not separate from you. The thoughts that move through your mind are part of a wider web of causes, stretching back through history, through culture, through the very laws of nature. You are not an isolated dot floating in emptiness. You are a node in an endless network, a wave rising from the ocean, inseparable from its source. This recognition brings with it a kind of peace, for if separation is an illusion, then loneliness is softened. The ache of isolation is replaced with the reassurance that we are always embraced by the infinite. To walk in a forest is to walk within God. To sit silently in your room is still to be held by the substance that pervades all things. Even when you feel most alone, cut off from others, misunderstood by the world, you are not truly apart. You are part of the infinite fabric, stitched into existence itself. Spinoza's philosophy can sound abstract, but here it touches the heart. Imagine how much of human suffering comes from this illusion of separation. We fear that we are cut off from love, that we are abandoned, that we are small and powerless against the vast indifference of the universe. We believe ourselves to be fragile, disconnected, exposed to the void. But Spinoza dissolves that fear. He whispers that the void does not exist, that there is no outside to the infinite. Everything you are, everything you see, is within God. You cannot fall out of being. You cannot be exiled from the whole. To live with this understanding is to walk more gently. It is to see in every face a reflection of the infinite. It is to understand that harm done to another is harm done to the self, because the boundary we imagine between self and other is only partial, never absolute. It is to replace envy with compassion, anger with understanding, loneliness with connection. When you see through the illusion of separation, you realize that every mode, every being, is a variation on the same eternal theme. We are not strangers in the world. We are expressions of the same infinite essence. And so, as you rest, you can let go of the tight grip of I and mine. You can loosen the borders of your identity and allow yourself to expand. You can feel yourself as part of the breath of the world, part of the rhythm of the cosmos. Just as a wave does not resist being part of the ocean, you need not resist your belonging. Spinoza's vision is not of lonely fragments scattered across empty space, but of an infinite wholeness where every part is embraced. To see the illusion of separation for what it is to awaken to the truth of unity. And unity brings peace. For what can be lost if nothing is ever truly separate? What can be feared if everything belongs? In this infinite substance, you are always held. You are always home. There is perhaps no fear more ancient, no shadow more persistent than the fear of death. Across cultures and centuries, human beings have looked into the silence of the grave and trembled. We build religions to promise us eternity, rituals to ward off endings, stories to soften the blow of mortality. But why do we fear death so deeply? Spinoza's philosophy offers an answer, one that does not deny our dread, but explains its roots and points the way toward peace. For Spinoza, fear of death arises from our imagination. The human mind, bound to the body, is constantly flooded with images of what is desirable and what is threatening. We imagine pleasures to pursue and pains to avoid. We imagine the continuation of our lives as a great good, and the loss of life as the ultimate evil. In our imagination, death becomes a black hole, a nothingness, a terrifying end to everything we cherish, and so we fear it. Just as a child fears the dark, not because the dark is dangerous in itself, but because the imagination fills it with monsters. This imaginative fear is strengthened by the way we cling to individuality. We mistake ourselves for isolated beings, separate from the whole. We think of my life as a possession, something I own and must defend against the intrusion of death. We identify so completely with the temporary wave that we cannot see the ocean beneath. And so, when the wave falls, we believe everything is lost. The illusion of separation feeds the terror of death. Religion often intensifies this fear, even as it tries to relieve it, by teaching that death leads to judgment, that we might be punished eternally for our failings. It amplifies our dread of the inevitable. By promising heavenly rewards only on conditions we cannot meet, it leaves us anxious, never certain, always yearning for assurance. Spinoza saw this as a kind of manipulation, a way in which priests and rulers used human fear to control and dominate. Fear of death became a tool of power, binding people to rituals and obedience. But Spinoza believed that true philosophy dissolves this fear. If we understand that we are not separate from the infinite, then death is no longer the annihilation we imagine. Yes, our individual form changes. The body ceases its functions. The mind ceases to imagine and desire. But the substance from which we are made does not vanish. We were never truly separate, so we cannot truly be lost. The wave may collapse, but the ocean endures. He also believed that fear of death comes from a lack of understanding. When we live guided only by imagination and emotion, death looms as a dark abyss. But when we live guided by reason, we see that death is nothing more than a transformation in the order of nature. Just as night follows day, just as winter follows summer, so too does death follow life. It is not an intrusion from outside, but part of the necessary order of things. To rebel against it is to rebel against reality itself. To accept it is to rest in harmony with the whole. Spinoza did not deny the sadness of parting. He did not suggest that we should not grieve when those we love pass away. But he offered a deeper consolation, that grief does not mean the loved one is erased. Their essence, their place in the infinite order, remains. Their mode has shifted, but their being is still within God, within nature. Nothing can fall outside of the infinite. To fear death, then, is to cling to illusion. To understand it is to dissolve fear in knowledge. Spinoza's aim was not to make us cold or indifferent, but to free us from anxiety, so that we might live more fully in the present. For when death is no longer a terror, life becomes more vivid. Each moment can be savored not because it defies death, but because it belongs to eternity. As you let your eyes grow heavy and your breath deepen, you might imagine death not as a wall at the end of a road, but as a door into the infinite whole of which you were always part. You might picture yourself, not as extinguished, but as returned. In this light, death is no longer the monster under the bed, but the quiet rhythm of being itself. And when you see it this way, fear begins to fade, anxiety softens. You are left with peace. Fear is a shadow that has followed humankind through every age. We fear what we do not understand. We fear what we cannot control. And above all, we fear the end of ourselves. Fear narrows the soul, Spinoza observed. It makes us small, desperate, and vulnerable to manipulation. Fear has been the tool of priests and rulers, of charlatans and tyrants, who trade promises of safety for our obedience. But Spinoza, sitting quietly in his rented rooms, grinding lenses with his steady hands, offered an antidote so profound that it remains startling even today. He called it amor Dei intellectualis, the intellectual love of God. At first, the phrase may sound strange. How can love be intellectual? Isn't love a passion, a surge of the heart, an emotional fire? For Spinoza, love was something deeper than fleeting passion. True love, he wrote, is joy accompanied by the idea of its cause. To love something is not merely to desire it, but to understand it and to rejoice in its existence. When that object of understanding is God or nature, the joy becomes infinite. This intellectual love is not worship in the conventional sense. Spinoza's God does not demand prayer or ritual. He does not listen, intervene, or forgive. The intellectual love of God is not about supplication, but about vision. It is the joy that comes from recognizing the order of reality, from understanding that everything flows from the same infinite substance, and that we ourselves are part of this eternal unfolding. Why does this dissolve fear? Because fear feeds on ignorance and imagination. When we do not know why something happens, we fill the void with anxiety. A storm becomes a punishment. A disease becomes a curse. Death becomes an abyss. But when we understand, when we see that storms follow the laws of nature, that illness arises from causes within the body, that death is a transformation within the whole, then the terror evaporates. Knowledge does not erase suffering, but it frees us from the superstition that suffering is meaningless or malicious. The intellectual love of God, then, is a state of serene joy that comes from this understanding. It is not the frantic love of a desperate believer trying to earn divine favor, but the steady love of a soul that sees itself within eternity. In this state, we are no longer enslaved by passions, tossed around by fear, envy, and anger. Instead, we are guided by reason, which shows us our true place in the infinite order. Imagine yourself standing on the shore, watching the tide roll in. If you think of yourself as separate from the sea, the waves may frighten you. They seem unpredictable, overwhelming, capable of swallowing you whole. But if you see yourself as part of the sea, if you understand the rhythm of its motion, then the waves no longer terrify you. They become beautiful, inevitable, part of a larger harmony. That is the intellectual love of God. It is to look at existence with the calm joy of recognition, not the panic of separation. Spinoza himself lived this philosophy. Exiled from his community, cut off from friends and family, working quietly in solitude, he could have become bitter, fearful, resentful. Instead, those who knew him described him as gentle, cheerful, unshaken. He embodied what he taught, that a person who understands the order of things can find joy, even in hardship, peace, even in solitude. His love of God was not sentimental, but steady, rooted in reason and clarity. To cultivate this love in our own lives, we need not memorize doctrines or cling to dogmas. Instead, we need only look closely at the world around us and within us, with patience and openness, to see how causes flow into one another, how the fabric of nature holds us, how even our struggles are part of the necessary unfolding. This is to love God intellectually, and from this, love springs freedom. For fear enslaves, but love liberates. When we love reality as it is, we are no longer trapped by resentment of what we cannot change. We are no longer paralyzed by dread of what is to come. We are no longer frantic in our search for meaning is everywhere, written into the very order of things. The intellectual love of God is not an escape from life, but a deeper embrace of it. As you let your breath deepen and your mind grow calm, you might feel this love stirring within you. Not a passion that burns and fades, but a quiet joy that expands and steadies. You might notice the rhythm of your breath, the beating of your heart, the simple fact of being here. Each of these, in Spinoza's eyes, is a mode of God, an expression of the infinite substance. To rejoice in them is to love God. To understand them is to rest in eternity. This is Spinoza's cure for fear. Not denial, not superstition, but understanding and love. A love that is intellectual, not because it is cold, but because it is clear. A love that is infinite, because its object is infinite. And once you feel it, fear begins to dissolve, like mist in the morning Sunday. Eternity often feels like something far away, something that begins only after death. Religions promise it as a reward for the faithful, a life beyond this life, stretching endlessly into the future. But Spinoza asked us to consider a startling idea. What if eternity is not something we must wait for, but something we can experience right now? In this very moment. What if eternity is not endless time, but timelessness itself, available whenever we step outside the prison of fear and imagination? To Spinoza, eternity was not an infinite stretch of minutes and hours, a calendar without end. Eternity was existence under the aspect of necessity, seen not through the lens of time, but through the vision of reason. Time is the way our finite minds perceive change. We imagine past and future. We remember what has been and anticipate what will be. This makes us anxious, because the past cannot be undone, and the future cannot be controlled. We are always pulled between regret and fear. But eternity, as Spinoza understood it, is the reality beneath these shifting perceptions. It is the recognition that the universe is one infinite substance, unfolding with absolute necessity. Everything that happens because it must, and everything that exists within the eternal order. To perceive life under this aspect is to see beyond time. It is to realize that, in a profound sense, we already live in eternity. How can we experience this? Not by fleeing the present, but by entering it more deeply. When you rest your mind from its frantic grasping, when you release your regrets of yesterday and your fears of tomorrow, you can feel the stillness beneath the flow of time. Your body breathes, your heart beats, the world moves around you. And yet, beneath all this change, there is a sense of necessity, of being held in something that does not pass away. This is what it means to live in eternity now. Consider the experience of looking at the night sky. At first, you see stars scattered across the darkness, distant, flickering, fragile. But then you realize that their light has traveled for thousands of years, that the patterns above you are part of a cosmic order far older than your own life. In that moment, You feel a glimpse of eternity, not as something beyond death, but as something present in the very structure of reality. The stars do not give you eternity as a gift. They show you that eternity was already here, and you were already in it. Spinoza believed that when the mind understands reality through reason, it participates in eternity. The mind, he wrote, is not destroyed with the body, because the true essence of the mind is the idea of the body within God's infinite intellect. What this means is that our essence, the truth of who we are, is eternal. We do not need to wait for heaven to live forever. We live forever whenever we see ourselves under the aspect of eternity. This vision is not meant to deny the flow of daily life. We still rise in the morning, still eat and sleep, still love and grieve. But alongside these changing experiences, there is the stillness of eternity, always present, always available. To touch it is to quiet the noise of anxiety. To feel it is to dissolve the sharp edge of fear. And so, living in eternity now is less about escaping time than about transforming our relationship to it. Instead of fearing what comes next, we rest in the knowledge that whatever comes is part of the eternal order. Instead of clinging desperately to moments that pass, we see them as necessary expressions of the infinite. Each moment is complete, because each moment is eternal in its essence. As you lie here, listening, you can practice this. Notice your thoughts about tomorrow, and let them go. Notice your memories of today, and let them drift. What remains is the stillness of now, a moment that does not slip away, but opens into eternity. In this stillness, you are no longer a prisoner of time. You are part of the eternal substance, living eternity not as something to come, but as something already here. This is the secret Spinoza offers us, that eternity is not a distant promise, but a present reality, and to live in it is to live free, fearless, and at peace. There are moments in life when emotions rise like storms. Anger flashes like lightning. Fear trembles like thunder. And desire pulls us with the force of a rushing tide. To live in such moments is to feel tossed and turned, uncertain and unsettled, as though the ground beneath us were shifting sand. Spinoza looked at this condition and asked, must we always be at the mercy of our passions? Or is there another way, a steadier way, to live? For Spinoza, the answer lay in the power of reason. Passions are not evil, he wrote, nor are they punishments sent to test us. They are natural effects, arising from our encounters with the world. When something brings us joy, we desire it. When something brings us pain, we fear or resist it. These reactions are part of the fabric of our being. Yet when we allow passions to dominate, when we live only in the push and pull of fleeting emotions, we live passively. We become like leaves carried by the wind, directed not by our own nature but by external forces. Reason, on the other hand, is the capacity to understand these forces. It is the power to step back, to see the causes of our emotions, to recognize them as part of the necessary order of nature. When reason shines its light, the storm of passion does not disappear, but it no longer terrifies us. Just as a sailor who understands the sea can ride the waves rather than be destroyed by them, so too can a person who understands the passions live with greater calm. Spinoza believed that true freedom does not come from denying our passions, nor from trying to escape them, but from understanding them. When we know why we feel as we do, we are less likely to be enslaved by the feeling. Anger becomes less consuming when we see it as a natural response to harm. Fear loses its grip when we see it as an anticipation of pain rather than a prophecy of doom. Desire becomes less frantic when we recognize it as an expression of our striving to persist in being. This understanding transforms the way we experience necessity. Most of the time, we resist necessity. We wish the world were different. We fight against what must be. And in doing so, we suffer twice. Once from the event itself, and again from our resistance to it. Reason offers another path. When we understand that everything follows from the eternal laws of nature, we see that events could not have been otherwise. The storm had to come. The loss had to happen. The joy had to pass. The joy had to pass. To live with reason is to see this necessity not as cruelty, but as order. And in that recognition, calm arises. Imagine standing before a great river. If you resist its current, you exhaust yourself, flailing against the inevitable. But if you understand the river, if you know its flow, you can move with it, guided rather than battered. Spinoza's philosophy is like that. Reason allows us to flow with necessity, to find peace in what must be, instead of despair in what we cannot change. The calm that comes from reason is not cold or detached. It is not indifference. It is a deep acceptance, a serenity that arises when we no longer demand that reality serve our passions. In this calm, love is purer, because it is not based on possession or fear of loss. In this calm, joy is steadier, because it is not tied to chance or accident. In this calm, grief is softened, because it is accompanied by understanding. Spinoza himself lived this truth. Exiled, misunderstood, often living in poverty, he could have been consumed by bitterness, but he was described by his friends as cheerful, gentle, even playful. His calm was not the absence of suffering, but the presence of understanding. He had trained his mind to see through the storm of passion into the clarity of necessity, and in that clarity, he found freedom. So as you listen, as you let your breathing slow, you can imagine this calm entering you. Each worry, each passion, each restless thought is like a wave passing across the surface. But beneath the surface is stillness, an order that does not break. When you connect with that order, when you see life under the aspect of eternity, you no longer need to fight the waves. You can rest in the calm that reason brings. This is Spinoza's lesson. That freedom is not the ability to control everything, but the ability to understand everything as part of the necessary whole. And in that understanding, there is peace. There is a quiet joy that comes not from possessions, not from triumphs, but from clarity. It is the joy of finally seeing how things fit together, of understanding what once seemed tangled and obscure. For Spinoza, this joy was not just a pleasant experience. It was the key to liberation. We suffer, he believed, because we misunderstand the world. We imagine ourselves as isolated, tossed about by chance, at the mercy of unpredictable forces. We imagine that pleasure and pain come to us randomly, or by the will of distant gods. We imagine that our desires are mysterious, that our fears are overwhelming, that our fate is unjust. And in this fog of imagination, we are tormented. But when we understand, the fog clears. Understanding does not erase pain, but it transforms it. To know why something happens is to see its place in the whole. To see its necessity is to accept it more easily. When you understand that the thunder follows from the laws of weather, you no longer think of it as a curse. When you understand that illness arises from natural causes, you no longer see it as a punishment. When you understand that your own emotions arise from the striving of your being, you no longer see them as alien invaders, but as parts of yourself. This understanding brings joy because it aligns us with reality. Instead of resisting, we flow. Instead of fearing, we accept. Instead of resenting, we comprehend. And in this comprehension, we feel at home in the universe. We are no longer strangers in a hostile land, but participants in an eternal order. Spinoza believed that the highest joy was the intellectual love of God, the recognition that everything that exists is an expression of the infinite substance. To understand this is to feel joy, because it is to participate in eternity. But even the smaller joys of understanding, seeing how causes link together, recognizing patterns, finding clarity, are steps toward liberation. Each insight dissolves a little suffering. Each moment of comprehension loosens the chains of fear. Think of the relief when you finally understand a problem that has long troubled you. The tension in your body eases. Your mind grows lighter. Your heart feels freer. Now imagine this feeling applied not just to a single problem, but to life itself. That is the joy Spinoza envisioned. A joy not based on fleeting pleasures, but on lasting clarity. This joy is not selfish, because understanding connects us to others. When we see why people act as they do, we are less likely to hate them. Anger softens when we understand its cause. Envy diminishes when we see it as a natural but misguided response. Compassion grows when we recognize that others, like us, are modes of God striving to persist in their being. Knowledge does not isolate us. It binds us more deeply to the whole. For Spinoza, liberation was not the absence of pain, but the transformation of it. We cannot escape necessity. We cannot undo the order of nature. But we can change the way we see it. And when we see it clearly, joy arises. This joy is steady, because it is based not on chance or change, but on eternal truth. As you rest now, you might reflect on the moments of understanding in your own life, the times when confusion gave way to clarity, when suffering softened, because you finally saw the cause. Each of those moments was a glimpse of liberation, a taste of Spinoza's joy. And if you carry that understanding further, if you cultivate it as he did, then suffering loses its sharpest edge. This is why knowledge matters. Not as a storehouse of facts, not as a badge of superiority, but as a medicine for the soul. Understanding frees us from the tyranny of imagination, from the torment of fear, from the loneliness of separation. It lifts us into the calm joy of eternity. Spinoza's joy is available to anyone who looks closely, who reasons patiently, who accepts necessity with serenity. It is not a joy that burns and fades, but one that steadies and deepens. It is the joy of being at home in the infinite. And once you taste it, you will know what true liberation feels like. There is a strange paradox in human life. We spend so much of our energy trying to be free, and yet the more we struggle against the conditions of existence, the less free we seem to feel. We dream of bending the world to our desires, of reshaping events to suit our needs, of escaping pain and securing happiness. And yet the world resists us. Storms still come. Bodies still weaken. People still leave. Time still marches on. Spinoza looked at this endless struggle and asked whether our idea of freedom might itself be mistaken. Perhaps freedom is not found in fighting necessity, but in understanding it. Perhaps we are most free, not when we can do whatever we wish, but when we learn to embrace what must be. Spinoza defined freedom in a way that unsettles the ordinary imagination. For most people, freedom means the absence of constraint. It means doing what one wants without interference. But this, he argued, is an illusion. When we act out of passion, out of anger, fear, or blind desire, we may feel free. Yet we are only reacting to external causes. We are like puppets moved by unseen strings. Our actions determined not by the essence of who we are, but by the accidents of circumstance. True freedom, Spinoza insisted, comes only when we act from the necessity of our own nature, when our deeds flow from the deep understanding of who we are and what the universe is. To live freely, then, is not to escape necessity, but to recognize ourselves as part of it. The universe unfolds by eternal laws, and we are expressions of that unfolding. Everything that happens, happens because it must. Nothing could be otherwise. To fight against this truth is to suffer. To see it clearly is to awaken. And in that awakening lies freedom. Imagine a musician playing a piece of music. The notes are already written, the tempo already marked. She cannot simply play whatever sounds she wishes without destroying the song. Yet within the necessity of the score, she discovers freedom. She interprets, she feels, she shapes the sound with her own touch. Her freedom is not in rejecting the structure, but in fully inhabiting it. In the same way, Spinoza says, we live within necessity. The structure of the world is fixed, but within it, we find freedom when we act with understanding, when we play our part knowingly and joyfully. This paradox of freedom through necessity was one of Spinoza's boldest insights. He saw that most of our chains are self-forged, born from our refusal to accept the nature of things. We cry out that life is unfair, that fate is cruel, that death is unjust. Yet these are not flaws in reality. They are parts of its eternal order. To see them as such is not to give up, but to live more fully. This does not mean Spinoza advocated resignation or passivity. Acceptance of necessity does not mean indifference. It means clarity. When we understand that events unfold by law, we stop wasting energy in futile resistance. We do what we can, guided by reason, and we accept what we cannot change with serenity. We live with purpose, but without the torment of impossible demands. We become aligned with the flow of existence. Spinoza himself embodied this freedom. Exiled from his community, often poor, afflicted with illness, he might have been consumed by despair. But those who knew him described him as cheerful, steady, gentle. He did not resist his condition with bitterness. He accepted necessity, and within that acceptance, he lived freely. His freedom was not the freedom of the powerful, but the freedom of the wise. To listen to these ideas at night, as sleep approaches, is to let them wash over the anxieties of the day. You may recall the things you wished had gone differently, the mistakes, the disappointments, the delays. You may feel the ache of regret or the pang of longing. But as Spinoza would remind you, these too were necessary. They unfolded as they had to unfold, and in this recognition, a strange peace arises. You see that you could not have been otherwise than you were, nor the day otherwise than it was. And in that surrender, you discover freedom, the freedom to rest, the freedom to be. When we live with this awareness, we stop measuring freedom by how much power we have to change the world. Instead, we measure it by how deeply we understand the world. A person who knows why they act, who understands why events happen, who accepts necessity as the order of reality. This person is freer than any tyrant, freer than any conqueror, freer than anyone who mistakes passion for liberty. True freedom, then, is not escape from necessity, but harmony with it. It is the paradox at the heart of Spinoza's vision. To accept what must be is to live most freely. One of the deepest illusions that grips the human mind is the illusion of control. We imagine ourselves as masters of our fate, as captains steering the ship of life across an ocean of chance. We make plans, we set goals, we construct elaborate designs for the future. And when events bend to our will, we congratulate ourselves on our power. Yet again and again, life reminds us of how fragile that power is. A sudden illness, an unexpected loss, a storm, a twist of fortune. These show us that much of what we thought we controlled was never in our hands at all. Spinoza looked into this illusion and saw its dangers. The belief in control is comforting at first, but it breeds disappointment and suffering. When we think we should be able to shape events entirely, every failure feels like personal defeat. Every misfortune feels like a betrayal. We rage against fate, or against ourselves, or against others, because we cannot accept that reality does not obey our commands. But Spinoza offered another way. Surrender. Not the surrender of defeat, not the giving up of despair, but the surrender of wisdom. To surrender is to recognize the limits of control, to see clearly what belongs to us and what does not. Our bodies are not entirely ours, for they are subject to the laws of nature. Our possessions are not entirely ours, for they can be taken or destroyed. Even our desires are not entirely ours, for they arise from causes beyond our choosing. What is ours, Spinoza says, is our understanding. What belongs to us is our capacity to see necessity as necessity, to accept what must be, and to live in harmony with it. Far from weakness, this surrender is strength. To live in illusion is to live at the mercy of every disappointment. To live in surrender is to be unshaken by the storms of fortune. Like a tree that bends with the wind instead of snapping beneath it, the person who surrenders to necessity endures with grace. They are not crushed by events, because they no longer demand that events conform to their will. Think of the peace that comes when you finally let go of something you cannot change. The moment you stop clinging, the moment you stop insisting, relief floods in. The burden lifts. Spinoza saw this as a path not only to peace, but to true empowerment. For when you let go of illusions, you live in truth. And truth, however stern, is kinder than false hope. This surrender is also an act of love. To accept the world as it is, rather than as we wish it to be, is to embrace reality in its fullness. It is to love God, or nature, as it truly is. Spinoza called this the intellectual love of God, not worshiping a deity who intervenes, not pleading with fate to be otherwise, but rejoicing in the infinite order that is. To surrender is to love the real, and in that love, we discover joy. The illusion of control isolates us. It makes us believe that we stand apart from the world, commanding it like a ruler commands subjects. But in truth, we are not apart. We are of the world. We are threads in the fabric, waves in the ocean, notes in the symphony. To surrender is to remember our place within this whole, and in remembering, we feel less alone. This surrender does not mean inaction. It does not mean we stop striving, or caring, or creating. Spinoza taught that each being strives to persist in its being. To live is to act, to desire, to seek. What changes with surrender is not the striving, but the spirit in which we strive. We no longer act with desperation, as though everything depended on us. We act with clarity, knowing that we are part of a larger order. We give our best, but we release the rest. As you rest now, you may reflect on the places in your life where you have clung too tightly. The fears, the plans, the need to control what cannot be controlled. And you may imagine loosening your grip, letting your hands open, letting the current carry you. This is not weakness. It is strength. It is the strength of one who trusts the river of necessity, who knows that even in surrender, one is carried by the eternal. The illusion of control is heavy. Surrender is light. And in that lightness, there is peace. Love, for most of us, is a word wrapped in fire. We think of it as passion, as longing, as a force that overwhelms us and carries us beyond ourselves. It is joy mixed with fear, sweetness mixed with jealousy. When we love, we often cling. We grasp at the object of our desire as if our very being depended on it. We say things like, "You complete me," or "I cannot live without you." And in such words lies a hidden confession that our love is as much about our need as it is about the other. Spinoza, who studied human emotions with the patience of a scientist and the compassion of a sage, looked closely at this kind of love and saw its dangers. He observed how easily it becomes possessive, how quickly joy can turn into pain, how love so often transforms into fear of loss, envy of rivals, or resentment of independence. When love is based on possession, it is fragile. When it depends on the satisfaction of desire, it is always haunted by the possibility of disappointment. But Spinoza did not dismiss love. He did not tell us to live without it. On the contrary, he believed that love is one of the highest joys of human life. What he sought was not to extinguish love, but to transform it, to guide us from possessive love to eternal, rational love. For Spinoza, love begins in desire, but it does not end there. True love grows when it moves beyond the narrow frame of need and sees the beloved not as a possession, but as an expression of the infinite substance of which we are all part. To love someone in the Spinozist sense is not to bind them to us, but to recognize in them the same eternal essence that lives in us. It is to rejoice in their flourishing, because it reflects the flourishing of the whole. This shift changes everything. Imagine a love that is not shaken by jealousy, not consumed by fear, not distorted by the need to control. Imagine loving someone because in their joy, you see the joy of life itself, because in their being, you glimpse the presence of the eternal order. Such love cannot be threatened by loss, because it is not based on possession. It is nourished not by the hunger to own, but by the recognition of shared essence. Spinoza called this higher form of love the intellectual love of God, or, we might say, the rational love of reality. It is the love that arises when we understand the world as one infinite substance, when we see each individual as a mode of that substance, and when we align our own affections with that vision. This love is eternal because it does not cling to what passes. It rejoices in what is, in the order itself, in the truth that everything belongs to the whole. Such love, when brought into our relationships, can transform them. Think of how often conflict arises from the attempt to control, the fear that the other will leave, the anger that they do not behave as we expect, the resentment when they seek their own path. Spinoza teaches us that these pains come from ignorance of our true nature. When we know that each person is an expression of the infinite, we no longer demand that they serve only us. We love them as themselves, as unique modes of the eternal, and we let them be. This does not mean indifference. It does not mean a cold, detached affection. On the contrary, it means a deeper warmth, a steadier joy, because it is not disturbed by the storms of passion. Rational love is more constant, more expansive. It allows us to feel joy without fear, to give without demand, to cherish without clutching. At night, as you lie in stillness, you may recall the loves that have shaped you. Some may feel tender, others painful. Perhaps you remember moments of loss, of disappointment, of jealousy. These are natural, human feelings. But now, imagine releasing them into the wider order. Imagine loving without needing to possess, without needing to control, without fearing loss. Imagine loving because, in another's existence, you see a reflection of eternity. This love is calm, like a deep river. It flows without rushing. It endures without clinging. Spinoza himself lived this philosophy. Though he never married, he loved ideas. He loved people quietly. And above all, he loved reality. His life was a demonstration of rational joy, serene, steady, free from the chains of passion that enslave so many. His love was not less than ours, but more. It was love purified of illusion. And so Spinoza reminds us that the highest love is not a chain that binds, but a light that reveals. It is not a possession, but a recognition. It is not the cry, "You are mine," but the whisper, "We are one." For most of us, death appears as the great wall at the end of the road. It is the boundary we cannot see past, the silence we cannot penetrate. We speak of it as an ending, as the loss of everything we are. And because of this, it fills us with dread. We cling to life, not only because we love it, but because we fear that beyond death lies nothing. Spinoza's vision of reality dissolves this fear. In his philosophy, nothing truly ends, because nothing exists apart from the one infinite substance. Everything that is a mode of that substance. To die, therefore, is not to fall into nothingness, but to transform, to return in a different way to the order of which we have always been a part. Think of a wave on the ocean. For a time, it rises, distinct, visible. We give it a name. We watch its crest and its fall. But the wave is never separate from the sea. It is the sea in motion, the sea in form. When the wave subsides, the sea remains. Nothing has been lost. The water is still there, only no longer in the shape of that wave. This is how Spinoza asks us to think of our lives. We are waves of the infinite, brief shapes in the endless sea of being. When we die, the form changes, but the substance remains. Nothing is lost. This understanding reframes death from annihilation into transformation. Our bodies return to the cycle of matter. Our minds dissolve back into the infinite order of thought. What is finite in us passes, but what is eternal never ceases. For Spinoza believed that the essence of the mind is eternal. Our individual perspective fades, but the eternal aspect of our mind, the part that participates in infinite thought, endures. To grasp this is not easy. Our passions cry out in protest. We want continuity. We want memory. We want the story of me to go on forever. Spinoza does not promise this. He does not console us with visions of personal immortality. Instead, he offers something quieter, but perhaps more profound. The knowledge that we were never separate to begin with. To die is not to vanish into nothingness, because nothing is ever truly separate from the infinite. This vision brings peace. Imagine lying in the grass on a summer evening, looking at the stars. You feel yourself small, fleeting, one tiny being among countless others. But then you realize, the atoms of your body come from stars, and to stars they will return. You are not alien to the cosmos, you are its expression. Death is not exile. It is homecoming. Spinoza taught that when we understand this, we no longer fear death. we see that the part of us that is eternal, the part aligned with infinite substance, cannot perish. Our limited individuality may pass, but the essence of life, of thought, of joy, continues, because it never belonged to us alone. For those who lie awake at night, haunted by the thought of endings, this is a balm. You are not on the edge of a cliff, staring into nothingness. You are in the sea, always in the sea, rising and falling as a wave, but never apart from the water. Spinoza himself lived with this serenity. He suffered from illness, his body frail, his life short, yet he faced death with calm. He did not cling. He did not despair. He knew that what was eternal in him could not be destroyed, and so he met death as a transformation, not a loss. Now, as you drift into sleep, you may feel this truth in your own being. The day fades, your thoughts quiet, your self dissolves into the vastness of rest, yet nothing is lost. Sleep is a small rehearsal of what Spinoza calls eternity, the surrender of form into the infinite order. And in that surrender, there is no fear, only peace. To live well, Spinoza believed, is not to live extravagantly or with constant excitement, but to live in a way that deepens joy, nourishes kindness, and allows peace to grow steadily in the soul. His philosophy was not only a meditation on the nature of God and the structure of reality, it was also a guide for ordinary life, for how we wake each morning, how we speak to one another, how we navigate the tempests of passion, and how we rest at night. Spinoza saw human life as a striving. Each of us, he wrote, strives to persist in our own being. This striving is not selfish in the crude sense, but the very essence of existence. To be alive is to seek to remain alive, to act in ways that sustain our body and our mind. Yet the question is not only whether we strive, but how we strive. Some strive blindly, chasing pleasures that vanish as quickly as they come, trapped in cycles of desire and disappointment. Others strive wisely, aligning their lives with what truly strengthens their essence: joy, understanding, harmony. Joy, for Spinoza, is the increase of our power to act, the expansion of our being. Sadness, by contrast, is the diminution of that power. To live ethically, then, is to seek joy in the deepest sense, not momentary pleasure, but a lasting increase in our ability to flourish. This joy is not selfish indulgence, because our flourishing is bound up with the flourishing of others. To cultivate joy is also to cultivate kindness, because when we live in hatred, envy, or cruelty, our own power is diminished. We become restless, conflicted, divided against ourselves. But when we act with generosity, when we treat others with understanding and compassion, we live in accordance with the truth of our nature. This insight leads to a vision of ethics that is radically different from rules imposed from above. For Spinoza, morality is not about obedience to external commands, nor about guilt and punishment. It is about alignment with reality. When we live in harmony with the eternal order, when we see things as they truly are, we naturally cultivate peace and kindness, because those qualities increase our power to exist joyfully. To hate is to misunderstand. To be cruel is to live in ignorance. But to be kind, to be just, to be gentle, these flow naturally from knowledge, for they are the conditions in which human beings can truly thrive. Consider the way anger consumes us. When we are angry, our mind narrows, our body tenses, our joy collapses into a tight knot of pain. Even when anger feels justified, it diminishes us. Spinoza tells us that to act from reason is to overcome such passions. This does not mean denying anger or pretending it does not exist. It means seeing it clearly, understanding its causes, and choosing not to be ruled by it. In doing so, we free ourselves from its chains and we open ourselves to peace. Peace, in Spinoza's view, is not the absence of struggle, but the calm that arises when our mind rests in understanding. It is the serenity that comes when we no longer fight against the necessity of things, but act with clarity within them. Peace is cultivated when we understand both ourselves and others, when we see that everyone acts from necessity, from causes beyond their control. To be angry at someone for being who they are is as senseless as to be angry at the rain for falling. When we see this, we begin to live with greater patience, greater compassion. This does not mean that we condone harm or accept injustice without resistance. It means that our resistance is guided not by blind passion, but by the steady light of reason. We act not to destroy, but to transform, not to dominate, but to harmonize. In this way, kindness and peace become not merely private virtues, but foundations for a life well lived. Spinoza himself embodied this ethic. Those who visited him remarked on his calm, his gentleness, his refusal to speak ill of others, even of those who condemned him. He lived simply, grinding lenses to earn his bread, and yet his life was filled with joy of the kind that springs from clarity. He cultivated peace in his small rooms, and kindness in his dealings with others, because he had seen deeply into the nature of things, and he knew that joy, kindness, and peace are the very essence of living well. As you rest, consider how your own life might shift if you embraced this vision. Think of the joy that comes not from fleeting pleasures, but from the quiet increase of strength and understanding. Think of the kindness that flows naturally when you see others not as enemies, but as fellow expressions of the infinite. Think of the peace that comes when you no longer resist what must be, but act wisely within it. This is the ethics of living well, not imposed from outside, but arising from the truth of your being. For many, the promise of eternal life is inseparable from religion. It is given as a gift by God, conditional on faith, obedience, or belonging to a chosen community. Eternal life, in this view, lies beyond the grave, hidden in realms we cannot see, promised in scriptures we cannot prove. For centuries, this vision gave comfort, but it also bred fear. Fear of punishment, fear of exclusion, fear of being cast out of divine favor. Spinoza broke radically from this vision. He did not believe in a God who rewarded or punished, nor in a heaven and hell that divided souls after death. He saw such ideas as projections of human passions, our hopes and our fears magnified into cosmic scale. Instead, he offered a vision of eternity that is not reserved for the afterlife, but is available here and now, in the present, in every moment of clear understanding. Eternal life, for Spinoza, is not something promised by religion. It is the condition of existence itself. Everything that is a mode of the one infinite substance, and that substance is eternal. To live in eternity is not to escape time after death, but to realize, while alive, that the deepest part of our being already participates in eternity. Our bodies change, our experiences pass, our personalities shift, but the essence of mind, the part that reflects infinite thought, belongs to eternity and does not perish. This vision transcends dogma because it does not depend on belief in miracles, scriptures, or rituals. It depends only on understanding reality as it is. To know that we are part of the infinite is already to taste eternity. When we see the world as necessary, when we align our minds with the order of things, We live beyond the limits of time. Even while we breathe, we can step into that eternal life, not as promise, but as present reality. Spinoza called this the intellectual love of God, the serene joy that arises when we recognize the unity of all things and love it for what it is. This love is not worship, not submission to authority, but a free, rational delight in reality itself. It is a form of eternity that no priest can give and no dogma can take away. It belongs to anyone who sees clearly, regardless of religion, creed, or tradition. For many, this is unsettling. It strips away the consolations of personal immortality, of reunion with loved ones in another world. But it offers something quieter and perhaps more profound. The knowledge that we are never truly separate, that we have always belonged to eternity, that what is eternal in us cannot die. This perspective has immense power to dissolve fear. The fear of hell loses its grip, because there is no divine judge who waits to condemn. The fear of exclusion fades, because no community holds the keys to eternity. Eternal life is not given from outside. It is realized from within. It is the birthright of all beings, because all are expressions of the infinite. As you listen now, consider the freedom this vision brings. You do not need to cling anxiously to promises of salvation, nor tremble before threats of punishment. You are already in eternity, as surely as a wave is in the sea. Your life, your death, your joys, your struggles, all unfold within the infinite order. To know this is to live with peace, to love reality with serenity, to dwell in eternity even as time passes. This is why Spinoza's vision transcends religion. It does not divide, it unites. It does not demand belief, it invites understanding. It does not threaten, it reassures. Eternal life is not a prize for the few, but the condition of the many. It is not deferred to a future beyond the grave, but lived now, in the clarity of mind, in the joy of recognition, in the love of what is. And so, as the night deepens, you may rest in this truth. You are already eternal. No ritual is required, no faith imposed, no dogma believed. You live within eternity now, and in that knowledge, fear dissolves. When we think of survival beyond death, our minds often reach for images of heaven, or the soul departing to another realm, or some continuation of memory and identity beyond the grave. But Spinoza's vision of what endures is different. It is quieter, less personal, and yet, perhaps, more profound. He tells us that though our individual memories, our fleeting desires, our daily selves may vanish when the body ceases, something of us, our true essence, remains eternal. To understand this, we must recall Spinoza's great insight. Everything that exists is an expression of one infinite substance, which he called God or nature. The body is a mode of extension, a finite form through which the substance expresses itself. The mind is the idea of that body, a mode of thought, the inner dimension that corresponds to the outer form. When the body dissolves, when its organs fail and its motions end, the particular idea of that body, the imagination, the memories tied to it, also fades. But the essence of the mind, its eternal aspect, is not destroyed, for it was never bound to time in the first place. Spinoza described this enduring essence as the part of the mind that is understood under the aspect of eternity. While much of our thinking is bound to images, memories, and the imagination, there is a deeper dimension of the mind that perceives truths timelessly. To know that 2 + 2 = 4, or that the essence of a triangle is its three-sided nature, is not to know something that comes and goes with the body. It is to participate in eternal truth. In the same way, when the mind understands the order of reality, when it sees itself as part of the infinite, it partakes of something eternal. This is why Spinoza insisted that the mind is not wholly destroyed with the body. The temporal, individual aspects perish, but the eternal aspect remains. The more we cultivate understanding, the more of our mind participates in eternity. To live with clarity is, in a sense, already to live forever. Death does not end this, for truth is not bound by time. Think of it this way. A candle burns, giving light. When the flame dies, the particular glow vanishes. But the essence of light, the laws of optics, the very possibility of illumination, these do not perish. They belong to a larger order that remains unchanged. So too with us. Our individuality flickers like a flame, but the essence of mind, the part that knows through reason, that loves through understanding, belongs to eternity, and so endures. This vision may seem abstract, but it carries deep comfort. It shifts our hope away from clinging to personal immortality, and toward recognizing that what is eternal in us is not the fragile self of memory and desire, but the essence that participates in truth. Our truest survival is not as ghosts wandering beyond the grave, but as part of the eternal order that underlies all things. And in this vision, the fear of death softens. For if our essence was never bound to time, it cannot be taken away. We were eternal even before birth, and we remain eternal even after death. Our bodies are finite, our personalities temporary, but the deepest part of us is already beyond the reach of decay. As you lie in the stillness of the night, you may feel the flickering of thoughts, memories, worries, fleeting images. These are like the surface of the mind, tied to the body, destined to fade. But beneath them is a deeper stillness, a clarity that does not change. That stillness is the essence of mind that Spinoza described, the eternal part that participates in the infinite. Resting in that stillness, you touch what survives beyond the body, what was never truly bound by time. In this way, Spinoza offers a vision of immortality without myth, eternity without superstition. The mind's enduring essence is not a story told to comfort us, but a truth discovered in the very structure of reality. And in that truth, there is peace. Endings are everywhere. The day ends as the sun sets. The seasons turn, and summer gives way to autumn. Friendships fade, lives change, loved ones depart. At every step, we are confronted by the fragility of what we cherish. And so, often, we live in quiet fear. Fear of losing what we love. Fear of reaching the end of our strength. Fear of death itself. Spinoza's philosophy invites us to see these endings differently, and to live with a strength that is not loud or defiant, but quiet, steady, and unshaken. For Spinoza, fear is born of ignorance. We fear what we do not understand, what seems arbitrary, what appears as chaos. Endings frighten us because we see them as interruptions, as assaults from outside. Death appears as an alien power that invades life, stripping it away. But when we see more deeply, when we understand that everything unfolds from necessity, then endings are no longer intrusions. They are part of the order, as natural as beginnings. To accept them is not weakness, but strength. The strength of one who sees clearly and rests in reality as it is. This acceptance is not resignation. It does not mean indifference or cold detachment. It means living in harmony with the order of things, without demanding that reality be other than it is. When we accept, we are not crushed by loss. We feel it, yes, but we see it as part of the whole. We grieve, but we do not despair. We suffer, but we do not rage against necessity. This is quiet strength, the ability to remain at peace, even in the face of endings. Spinoza's own life was marked by endings. He lost his mother at a young age. He was excommunicated from his community, cut off from the warmth of belonging. His health was frail, his years few. And yet, he did not live in bitterness. He accepted what necessity brought. And within that acceptance, he lived with joy and serenity. His strength was not the strength of conquering the world, but of understanding it. To live without fear of endings, Spinoza tells us, is to live with love of what is eternal. When we recognize that everything finite is a mode of the infinite, we see that endings are not annihilations, but transformations. The form changes, but the substance remains. The wave falls, but the ocean endures. When we accept this, we stop clinging desperately to forms, and we begin to rejoice in their place within the whole. Acceptance also changes the way we live in the present. When we are afraid of endings, we cling anxiously to what we have. We hold too tightly, we grasp, we refuse to let go. But when we accept endings, we are freed to love more generously. We can appreciate each moment for what it is, without demanding that it last forever. We can love people without suffocating them with our fear of loss. We can live more fully, because we are not haunted by what must come. This acceptance is not easy. It requires practice, patience, reflection. It requires us to let go of illusions, to quiet the cries of passion, to see beyond the surface of things. But with each step, fear loosens its grip, and in its place grows a strength that is calm, steady, and enduring. As you listen now, as sleep approaches, you may think of the endings in your own life. Some may be painful, some bittersweet, some still fresh. You may feel the ache of them, the longing that they might have lasted longer. And yet, if you look more deeply, you may see that each ending was part of a larger unfolding. None were outside the order. Each belonged. And so, even in endings, there was necessity. Even in loss, there was continuity. To accept this is to rest in peace. To see endings not as enemies but as part of the eternal order is to dissolve fear. And in that dissolution, strength arises, the quiet strength of one who knows that nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed. Spinoza's wisdom leads us here, to this calm acceptance, to this fearless peace. It does not erase sorrow, but it softens its sting. It does not deny endings, but it shows us their place within eternity. And with this, we may live without fear. Centuries have passed since Spinoza sat in his quiet rooms, polishing lenses, writing with steady hand the words that so many feared and so few understood. And yet, even now, his ideas whisper to us, as though carried by the wind of time. They come not with the thunder of conquest, nor with the drama of prophecy, but with a gentler voice, the voice of clarity, of calm, of reasoned love. His philosophy endures, not because he sought power, but because he sought truth. And truth has a way of surviving, quietly but irresistibly. When we look back, we see that Spinoza stood at a crossroads. The world of the 17th century was still entangled in superstition, authority, and fear. But it was also awakening to reason, science, and freedom. In this fragile moment, Spinoza dared to say what many only thought in whispers. that God was not a distant ruler, but the very substance of reality, that miracles were misunderstandings of natural law, that Scripture should be read not as divine decree, but as human literature, that freedom was not escape from necessity, but understanding it. For these words he was cast out, excommunicated, condemned by priests and preachers alike. Yet over time, his vision seeped into the soil of modern thought. The seeds he planted grew slowly, but they grew with quiet strength. Philosophers who came after him, even when they disagreed, could not ignore him. Leibniz wrestled with his ideas. Hegel declared that to be a philosopher, one must first be a Spinozist. Einstein, centuries later, would say that his God was the God of Spinoza, the God revealed in the lawful harmony of the universe, not in the shifting whims of a judge above the clouds. His influence stretches beyond philosophy. In politics, his insistence on freedom of thought laid foundations for democracy and secular society. In science, his identification of God with nature gave courage to those who sought explanations in natural law, rather than divine intervention. In psychology, his analysis of the passions anticipated modern understandings of emotion. In spirituality, his vision of eternity offered solace to those disillusioned by dogma, but still yearning for transcendence. And yet, Spinoza's legacy is not only in books, in systems, in history. It is in the quiet ways his ideas speak to our hearts. When we are overwhelmed by fear, his words remind us that fear comes from ignorance, and that understanding can dissolve it. When we are consumed by desire, his teachings remind us that true joy is not in possession, but in clarity. When we fear death, he whispers that death is not loss, but transformation, that nothing is ever outside the infinite. In our modern world, his voice is more needed than ever. We live in times of noise and distraction, of passions amplified by endless demands and restless comparisons. We are told to strive, to consume, to cling, to fear. But Spinoza reminds us to pause, to breathe, to understand. He teaches us that we are not separate fragments tossed in chaos, but expressions of an infinite whole. He teaches us that to love reality, to see it clearly, is the path to peace. His ideas still whisper because they do not demand belief. They invite recognition. They ask us to look at the world, to look within ourselves, and to see what is already there. They invite us to see God not in thunder or miracles, but in the order of the universe, in the laws that govern the stars and the heart alike. They invite us to see eternity not as a distant promise, but as a present reality. They invite us to live with freedom, not as license, but as harmony with necessity. This is why, though centuries have passed, Spinoza remains with us. He is not a prophet to be worshipped, nor a dogma to be obeyed. He is a companion in thought, a steady presence for those who seek calm in a restless world. His legacy is not in monuments or temples, but in the quiet resilience of ideas that continue to whisper, continue to soothe, continue to liberate. And so, as you listen, you may feel that whisper within yourself, a reminder that you are not separate, a reminder that fear is an illusion born of misunderstanding, a reminder that love, when it is rational and eternal, can never be lost. These are Spinoza's gifts to us. They have endured for centuries, and they will endure as long as there are hearts seeking peace and minds seeking truth. His ideas whisper still, and they whisper to you now. Now, as the day fades into silence and the night gathers around you, let us rest in Spinoza's vision. Close your eyes and let your body sink into stillness. Feel the weight of the bed beneath you, the gentle rhythm of your breath, the quiet beating of your heart. These simple motions, these quiet sensations, are part of the infinite order. You are not separate from them, and they are not separate from the universe. As you breathe, imagine that each inhalation draws in not only air, but the calm of the whole cosmos. Imagine that each exhalation releases not only air, but the burdens of fear and worry. Slowly, gently, let your breath become a rhythm that connects you to the greater rhythm of nature, the tides of the sea, the turning of the stars, the rise and fall of seasons. You are part of that rhythm. You always have been. You always will be. Now, let your mind drift to the thought of eternity. Not eternity as endless time, stretching forward without end. Not eternity as a reward to be earned, but eternity as Spinoza saw it, existence itself, the infinite substance, the order that underlies all things. Imagine yourself resting not in time, but in that stillness beneath time, that endless embrace in which all things exist. In this eternity, there is no loss, for nothing is ever separate. There is no fear, for everything belongs. If thoughts arise, memories of the day, worries for tomorrow, see them as waves rising on the ocean of your mind. Watch them rise, watch them fall, and let them dissolve back into the sea. They are not you. They are not permanent. Beneath them is the ocean itself, vast and calm, holding everything. Rest in that calm. Rest in that ocean. Now, think of death not with fear, but with peace. Imagine it not as a wall, but as a doorway. Not as an ending, but as a transformation. Just as the wave returns to the ocean, so too do you return to the infinite. Nothing is lost. Nothing is wasted. The form changes, but the substance remains. Feel the quiet strength of this truth. You are never outside the whole. You are never separate. You are never lost. As you lie here, feel the presence of love, not the grasping, possessive love that clings, but the eternal love that sees and rejoices. Love for life as it is. Love for the world as it unfolds. Love for the infinite that holds you always. This is Spinoza's intellectual love of God, and it is within you now. Let this love soften your body. Feel your muscles relax, your thoughts quiet, your breath deepen. With each exhale, release a little more fear, a little more tension, a little more illusion of separation. With each inhale, receive peace, clarity, eternity. You do not need to strive. You do not need to cling. You are already within eternity. You are already embraced by the infinite. You are already at home. Now, allow yourself to drift, gently, into sleep. Let go of the day. Let go of worry. Let go of time. Rest in eternity. Rest in peace. Rest in the infinite love that never ends. And so, we come to the end of tonight's journey into Spinoza's philosophy, a vision of eternity, peace, and love that whispers gently through the centuries. Now, it's time for you to rest. Let go of the day. Let go of all worry, and allow yourself to drift into deep and peaceful sleep. If you're still awake, you can explore more by clicking one of the 2 videos on your screen to continue your journey. And don't forget to subscribe, so you'll never miss the next story that helps you relax, reflect, and rest well. Sleep deeply and sleep well.